Hello you amazing people, welcome back to another video. Today we are diving into a new subreddit for this channel, which is r/ProRevenge. These stories are just so much more satisfying than choosing beggars or entitled parents because you get that satisfaction at the end. So it's going to be a longer video with no commentary, just something that you can listen to in the background or whatever, do your own thing. And if you like this kind of video, let me know. If not, also let me know, and I will listen to you guys. So let's just jump right into the first story. Harry Flight. Posted by u/poldark_light. Planes aren't fun. I'd teleport if I could. The biggest problem is usually the time and hassle at the airport. But I had a memorable encounter on one flight that makes me shake my head to this day, at least 18 years later. Please remember that this was pre-9/11. The rules were different then. I was flying constantly for work at the time and had established a routine to settle in fast in my exit row. One of the last aboard was a young woman, late teens, early 20s, with very long straight hair. I didn't really notice her until we were at altitude for a while and she started flipping her hair back and forth over her headrest. This was a 5-hour flight. Her hair hung down onto the keyboard of my laptop. I got her attention and asked her to pull her hair back onto her side of her seat, but she refused. Why should I have to sit on my hair and get a headache? I got some tissue and moved her hair off to the side. She turned around and told me to stop touching her hair, then promptly tossed it back over as before. I put on the call button and had a flight attendant, all of whom knew me on this route, tell her to knock it off. She grumbled, but I was able to continue without hair in my work for a while. At some point, she did it again, and her hair flipped right into my cup of water. No harm to her, but my beverage was ruined. So I pulled out 2 pieces of bubble gum and started chewing. I like blowing bubbles. I'm good at it, too. A little girl across the aisle had noticed the hairy diva's antics and was suddenly very interested as she watched me blow bubbles. Sure enough, a hair flip came soon, and it coincided with a rather large bubble. "Your hair has gum in it!" The little girl's gleeful shriek announced the news to the annoying person in front of me. The hairy diva's hands flew to her hair. She scrambled awkwardly to the lavatory and she never came back. I was so happy to have her away for a bit that I didn't even ask where she ended up. I just hope she learned her lesson or cut her hair. I told you to take me off your chain emails, you old creep. Posted by user/MrGreaves787. Sorry for the mobile formatting and long read, TLDR at the end. I have a huge broken family that's unnecessarily close and totally dysfunctional. My great step-uncle, let's call him John, is a constant feature in my life, as well as a cast of other characters who could all get their own posts. John is an asshole. He's 90, but he's still sharp as a tack, which he uses to push his bizarre views on everyone he meets, forever. His weapon of choice is the chain email, which he uses to great effect. John has used this chain email to do everything from push his healthcare plan he wrote, spoiler, no one is covered, to his crackpot inventions for perpetual energy, to talking about personal family details, to spreading racist and sexist ideas to everyone in his Rolodex. I'm not talking racist and sexist 2019, let's debate this racist and sexist. I'm talking women should be seen and not heard, and black people were better off as slaves. Nice guy. After 3 years of receiving these, he got my email from my LinkedIn profile. I begged him to remove me from the list, as I was getting email from him daily and would rather not block him. He refused, saying that he was opening my mind. I was too sensitive and that if I didn't like them, I didn't have to read them. Last week, he decided to send me and my brother a rough draft of his book through LinkedIn direct message, asking for comments. He doesn't want comments. I found this strange. Why not send it to the email list? Well, I decided to read the book, and it turns out that the reason he didn't send it to his list is because it is the most bizarre, sickening commentary on sexual harassment I have ever read. He wanted me to validate it if it was normal before he sent it to his publisher. He doesn't have one. My little brother was so upset by it that he told me he never wanted to speak to John again. To avoid boring you with the details, his thesis is that women want to be abused. John has been divorced 4 times. The most interesting part was a little biographical section about things he had done that would constitute sexual harassment in 2019. Like a secretary who worked for him, he's a doctor, who repeatedly told him no and actually quit the job because he wouldn't stop trying. Told as a humorous anecdote, he had another in there about trying to hook up with one of his patients. They always tell on themselves. So I gave him what he asked for. I gave a full, scorched earth review of his manuscript, pulling out key notes and burning it to the ground for being anachronistic garbage. I paid careful attention to the biographical details, calling out the harassment for what it is. Could I have sent it to him over LinkedIn DM? Sure. Did John pay me that courtesy when he used the chain email list to tell everyone he knew that my dad was out of work, causing great embarrassment? No. So I did what John would have done. I replied all to his chain email list with my full review. Everyone from his neighbor to his kids to his ex-wife to his dentist got to see who the old man really is. While I doubt anyone was surprised, he's super ass-grabby and creepy. Seeing it in his own words surprised a lot of people. The response was pandemonium. All sorts of people started arguing over the harassment, mostly furious with John, pleasantly surprising to me. I have since been removed from the chain email list along with my brother. He is 90 and lives alone in the middle of nowhere. He won't face any consequences, but I'm really looking forward to seeing John at Passover now. Won't move your car? I hope you like rotting meat in your vents. Posted by user/Scarivo. This is my first Reddit post, so here I go. Also, this is mostly told by my mom, TLDR at the bottom. Let me set the scene. The year is 2017 and my family and I live in a quiet suburban street. It's mostly retired couples and some families with very young kids. Normal. Now, earlier this year, the house diagonal from us decided to move and sold it. About a day after everything's packed away, 5 cars come peeling down the street and pull into the driveway and out in the road. They're a bunch of college-aged kids, so we give them some slack and let them go for a day or two. Meanwhile, day in and day out, different cars keep peeling down the street. Some are over 30 miles over the speed limit. This does not go over well with the neighbors. For most of the younger kids, walk and ride their bikes down our street. Everyone's concerned they might hurt someone or someone's dog. Before something serious can happen, some of the neighbors who've lived there for 20 plus years go over and meet the newbies. This includes my mom. They're polite at first. They agreed not to go over 35, but more cars keep racing down the road. Along with that, they seem to be having parties every other Tuesday with about 30 cars up the street. Now the niceties are over, and the cops are called. Usually they wouldn't do this, but about 5 calls came in from a bunch of houses, and the police department was fed up. Having nothing better to do, they send one of the deputies and they wait around the corner for a few hours a day. About 2 fines are given, and they slow down. Except they get smart. There's only one place the deputy can hide, so they send 1 car to see if they're there. If not, they speed again. The deputy gives up after about 3 days and is gone. A few months pass and we were at a loss of what to do. Summer is almost here, so my brother and I are outside more. We have a basketball hoop at the edge of the road right across from the house. Our driveway is almost at a 45-degree angle and all my brother's buddies come and play, so we leave it there. There's a problem. The cars keep parking to block the hoop. My brother is pissed since that's all he used to do in the summer. He goes over to the house and guys just shut the door on him. Now my mom's pissed. She marches over there and asks them to move their cars sweetly, and when they refuse, she hatches a plan. This summer was a hot one, and my mom decides to cook some homemade pea soup. Now, she burns this batch, by accident of course. Now instead of chucking it out, she puts it in this big plastic jar, seals the lid, and places it out on the back porch in the middle of the sun. Weeks pass and she occasionally opens it. There are maggots squirming around and it turned a deep brown green. There's also this clear yellow liquid that separated itself to the top. Disgusting. Meanwhile, my brother is determined to play basketball when there's a little opening. About 20 minutes in, the ball bounces onto one of the cars by accident. There was no mark, but the car alarm goes off, so he's trying to leave. I run out to see one of the regulars who lived there, a woman yelling obscenities at my brother and how he needs to pay for her car. My mother runs out after me and starts yelling at the lady to get away from my brother. There was no damage, and it was clear, but the lady kept screaming. My brother and I run inside and watch as the woman follows my mom up the driveway, waving her arms and still yelling. My mom yells for her to get off the property or she'll call the cops. By now, our older neighbors are watching, some walking over, and the lady realizes that she better leave or she might actually get in trouble. She runs across the street and slams the door. Around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday with one of their parties, my mom puts on a gas mask. My dad worked in pest control, so he had one, and takes out the soup. The stench was terrible. It was rotting meat and something indescribable. She takes the jar and goes over to the cars as quiet as possible. Onto almost every car, she dumps the rotting pea soup, onto the windshield, and into that space where there are windshield wipers. Before anything, I have to explain these were nice cars, not sports, but Priuses and new cars, which doesn't fit with their age. The next morning, my mom's out sitting in the garage smoking a cigarette like always. It's about 6 a.m., and the lady that yelled at my brother comes out first. A minute or two passes as this woman has the most disgusted face. She turns on the windshield wipers and a hunk of rotting ham is sent flying. My mom's now in tears, and I mean tears. I wake up and head downstairs to the garage to see the woman yelling and about 20-ish kids heading to their cars. Each one's trashed. The cops are called, but since no evidence, they can't press charges against my mom. One by one, they leave in their ruined cars. They move out 3 weeks later. Threaten and try to cheat me? Enjoy losing everything. Posted by user/Meridian. Hey guys, I'm relatively new to Reddit and thought this story might delight you. Saddle up, it's a long one, unfortunately. TLDR at the bottom. Some needed background. I finished school 3 years ago and was accepted at a top university halfway across the country for engineering studies. I had difficulties finding a place to live and wound up renting a room that was way, and I mean way, too expensive. I was in need of some sweet, sweet cash. I enjoy just learning about anything and everything and love sharing it with others, so I immediately found some school kids in need of private tutoring. On the off chance they know of a place, I mentioned to all of them that I'm on the lookout for a cheaper apartment, and holy shit, one of them is actually moving because their apartment is too small for them. Now this family consists of the 2 kids, the father, a total pushover, and mother, hive mind. She is a professor of political science at the country's best university. None of them function without her, and she likes controlling any situation. But seeing as she had offered me her flat, I was willing to look past her know-it-all attitude. From now on, we shall call her Hag. Fast forward a few months. Hag moved out of my flat, the day before I was due to move in. I had organized a free minivan to transport my stuff, but the place was still a mess. The cleaning crew, one lone person, asked me to help clean. And as I was without a roof over my head, of course I helped. I also had to leave all my stuff half assembled and covered by plastic in the middle of the room so the painter could get to the walls. All in all, I moved in 8 days late and scrubbed the apartment for 10 hours. Nonetheless, she sent me an email promising to pay me back for the delay and all the work I put in. This is going to be important later. After not even 2 weeks, the bloody ventilation in the bathroom breaks and our internet provider tells us our wiring is messed up. I email Hag, who tells me to contact house management as she herself is a tenant and we are subtenants. I do so. Next thing I know, I get a mail back from management. You are illegally occupying the property and must vacate the flat immediately. I tell Hag and she tells me not to worry, she's taking care of it. I should have known something was wrong, but I was still wet behind the ears. A month and a half after those mails, the middle of August, she rings our doorbell and tells us she was given 3 months notice and we all will have to leave. She handed us a termination of our contract that would kick us in the middle of November, which we signed, believing this was all our best interest. However, she wanted to strike a bargain with the owner of the property to at least allow us to stay there. She didn't want to see us students homeless after all, or so she said. We get a mail from the house management telling us they'd be happy to carry us over as proper tenants as long as Hag agrees. Their rent was even lower than what Hag had demanded. The next day, Hag calls me and asks if management has reached out to us. I say yes and tell her they'd keep us as tenants. She then asks me how high the new rent was. I, as I've mentioned, I'm still wet behind the ears at this point. Tell her the new price. Haig then tells me she'd like to move back in because her marriage is in a difficult spot and the new rent isn't much higher than her old rent. I get really upset at the betrayal, hang up, and call management. When I told them what Haig had said, they assured me they had no intention of letting her back in the apartment. Apparently, Haig has not only been terrorizing house management for years, but also failed to ever mention to them that she was subletting. Not only that, she is also legally bound, if she does sublet, to charge the exact same rent she pays herself. Turns out, she was making a couple $100 a month by overcharging us. I'm shocked at this point, but more importantly, I'm fucking pissed. Management assures us that they will let us stay in our flat and that they will speak to Haig. By the middle of October, I get an angry mail from Haig demanding €2,000 for the kitchen she is leaving in the flat. Now, I might have started out tolerating her, but when someone grinds my gears, oh boy will I get back at them. I write back saying we'd be happy to pay her €1,000. Not even 5 minutes later, she calls my mobile. I pick up and she shouts at me. The kitchen is worth twice as much as she is demanding. This isn't up for discussion. I should just pay and be happy. I calmly ask to explain how she calculated that price. She says she'll send me her invoice in an email and hangs up. I check her invoice, and it's a list of all appliances with their market value and all the furniture, except not only had the appliances in the kitchen been installed already, which alone reduces their value by about 20 to 25%, but all the prices she listed were twice the official price found on the company's website. Now my little engineer's brain is really going full speed. How can I use this against her? Next thing I know, I've received 4 more emails from Haig, all the exact same. She was threatening to evict us if we didn't give her the money we wanted. I wrote back saying she still hadn't reimbursed me for the delay and the cleaning I did at the beginning. She calls my phone again, and if my brain was going at full speed before, well, now it's in goddamn hyperspeed territory. I set my phone to loudspeaker and recorded the conversation with my headset microphone. She screamed at me that I should just shut up and pay her. If I don't, she'd add the painters and cleaners bill to the €2,000. She proceeded to call me all kinds of slurs and told me she'd keep the reimbursement money as grievance money. Her last words were that she'd sue me if I hadn't paid by the beginning of November, and she'd contacted my university's board to have me expelled. My parents paid her the money because they were scared she'd actually kick me out. My best mate's dad just so happens to be a lawyer. With all my evidence, which was measured exactly a metric fuck ton of evidence, we drew up a case against Haig. My lawyer presented it to a judge who happily agreed to have a hearing. I was personally allowed to give Haig her court invitation, and I did it on Christmas. Obviously, it wasn't the state-signed invitation, but the judge agreed that, as it was just before Christmas and the official court order wouldn't reach her until the middle of January, it would be kind of me to give her a letter of my own so she could prepare herself. I'll leave out all the boring court proceeding details. She still had her smug expression of superiority even as the judge read aloud the claims against her. Profiteering, abusive position power, personal threats, fraud, and blackmail. She calmly explained that I was grotesquely overstating what had transpired. We presented the hate mails she had sent me. She was still saying that she was just trying to speed things up. My lawyer played my audio recording. Damn, I've never seen someone's face go pale that quickly. We didn't just wipe her smug-ass smile off her face, we slapped it off her from her blind spot. Her lawyer tried to have that recording filed as not admissible because, which was true, I was recording without her consent, which is illegal. The judge, after having heard some of our other evidence, decided that I was not out of line as Haig had obviously threatened me before, so he ruled my recording was still admissible. We presented the judge with the rest of my evidence, including a statement by the house management that Haig had tried to spy on another person's rent, which is also illegal in my country. At the end of it, Haig was just sitting there, dumbfounded, and for the first time I didn't hear her say a single word. Suffice to say, she ended up paying back the money for the kitchen, the delay, and on top of that, had to also pay the court proceeding and reparations. Our state has a no-record policy for political professors. Although this was a civil lawsuit, university board must have decided that her behavior and abuse of power was just too much. She lost her job at the university, her honorary title, and has moved to a different city. I catfished my abusive dad to prove to my family he was a cheater. Posted by user/emergencydream. I posted this on r/confession yesterday and was told to post it here too, so here it goes. About 2.5 years ago, I began to suspect my dad was cheating on my mom. He would frequently come home late with no explanation and often left for multiple days on business trips. He was emotionally abusive, quite neglectful of the family, and very narcissistic. He made my mother heavily depressed and all but destroyed her self-confidence. Unfortunately, she either couldn't see it or didn't want to see it, so after years of his bullshit, I decided to call him out on it. When I confronted him about it, he denied everything and my mother sided with him. It was at this point I decided I didn't care about the consequences and set up a fake account of a girl in her late 20s using pictures on the internet. After sending a bunch of friend requests so it didn't look like a fake account, I added my dad and proceeded to start texting him. Almost immediately he began to flirt and eventually asked to meet up. I made up a few excuses and such to bide some time and started sending much more explicit messages. He sent them back and I finally had enough to expose him to the rest of my family. I sat down with Mom and showed her the messages. At first she was screaming at me and refused to speak to me for a few days. I don't blame her one bit. What I did was obviously morally gray, but she deserved to know. Eventually she sat down with me again and told me she was going to confront Dad about it. I knew then, in that chat, things between us would never be exactly the same again. And that still holds up today. She confronted Dad, who tried everything to weasel his way out of it, but there was nothing he could do. They divorced shortly after, and me and my mom moved out to a smaller house. Although things are still being repaired between us, I don't regret it at all. She is much happier in her day-to-day life and is thinking of getting back into dating soon. I stopped all contact with my dad since, but I know that shortly after the divorce, he got a new girlfriend. Harass and humiliate me for years? I'll ruin your senior year in one night. Posted by user/wampapineth. Several years ago, when I was in high school, I was somewhat unique compared to other students. I didn't have any particularly special talents or play any sports. But I was Jewish, which as a student at a school in the Deep South that is predominantly populated by white Christians, you'd think I had 9 toes. Most people I met didn't care. Some would make jokes at my religion's expense, which I didn't mind since I had a good sense of humor. There was one student in particular, though, who always seemed to have it out for me. I barely knew this guy, only met him a few times in some classes we shared together, but he never missed an opportunity to chastise me for being Jewish, especially when other people were around. Other students would sometimes make harmless jokes. I heard the Jew with a boner runs into a wall and breaks his nose joke about 1,000,000 times, but this guy took it too far. At first, he'd confront me and abruptly start conversations by joking about the Holocaust. I'd ignore him and wouldn't think much of it. Whenever I saw him, he'd continue doing the same kind of thing, but I kept ignoring him, which led him to escalating his jokes. He began approaching me when he was with a group of his friends. The more friends he had around him, the more he was willing to say. He'd tell me his new nickname for my family was Hitler's Unfinished Business, that my mom would die and spend eternity getting raped by Satan. He'd draw swastikas on my notebooks, one time on my windshield. I didn't see him do this, but no one else I knew would have done that. I always have been a sticks and stones kind of guy, but the way he persisted with his behavior really pissed me off. Most other people would assume he was joking when he made these messed up jokes. Not really sure why, people acted weird around Jews at my school, so they'd laugh along with him. Teachers didn't do anything about it, and my friends encouraged me to continue ignoring him. But I hated how he kept bringing my family, people he'd never met, into this. It got even worse when he'd start making jokes at my expense in classes we had together, or anytime I was talking to girls. His motivation for treating me like this was having an audience would reaffirm his anti-Semitism was funny. Freshman year turned into sophomore year turned into junior year, and suddenly I was a senior, and this guy was still going after me. For most of high school, I just ignored this guy. But when I became a senior, I realized I didn't want to end high school getting treated like this. So I started gathering intel on this guy. I looked into which clubs he was part of, where he went during his free periods, what he did on weekends. I even figured out info like his locker combination, which was actually very easy to get, and his license plate number. A lot of this info I gathered just from his Facebook page, but I also had a friend who occasionally hung out with this guy. My friend told me that this guy frequently smoked weed and drank on weekends, which normally I wouldn't care about, but I wanted all the leverage I could get. A few months into the year, my school had its annual homecoming game and dance. I learned from my friend that this guy's parents were out of town, so he planned on throwing a pregame at his house before the dance, where I knew he would at least be drinking. On homecoming night, I checked his friends' Snapchat stories to know what was going on at this pregame. It helped that most of them brought dates I was Snapchat friends with, and girls always post everything on social media, so I'd have new intel around every 10 minutes from their Snap stories. I already had his license plate number and correctly assumed he'd take the most efficient route from his house to the dance venue. So I constantly looked at these people's Snapchat stories until one of them posted a video of all of them leaving the house. Perfect. This was exactly the kind of info I needed. Around 10 minutes later, I called the cops and acted like a concerned neighbor. I gave them the info on his car and that I saw him drunkenly stumble into it with a girl who also looked very drunk before driving off. Just implying a drunk girl might be taken advantage of was more than enough to set off alarms. And the officer on the phone thanked me and said he'd check out the neighborhood. The following Monday, he wasn't at school. I didn't see him in class again until a week later, and he looked absolutely defeated. He didn't acknowledge me on his way in. His face looked sunken. I learned from my friend later on, his way to the dance, he'd been stopped by a cop car where they found alcohol and a bag with a small amount of pot completely unconcealed in the back seat. He wasn't drunk when he was driving, 0.08 breathalyzer, but since he was a minor, he only had to be above a 0.02 to be convicted for a DUI. He was arrested on the spot. Don't know what happened to the girl he was with. No one knew that it was my fault this guy got arrested and likely ruined his senior year, but he never bothered me again. I guess he had bigger things to worry about. I'm the worst neighbor and HOA board member ever? Lose your job and HOA. Posted by user/doggologopoo. Let me start by saying never purchase a house in HOA. It is a complete mess that should be regulated and illegal. If I knew about HOAs when I first bought my home, I would have never purchased my first home in one. Me and my wife purchased our first home when we were 24 and 25. We spent months looking at houses and areas and tried to find a forever home in a good district for potential future kids, etc. We finally found a perfect one at a decent price. At first, everything was great, super nice neighborhood and decent neighbors. Well, a few months after buying the house, we rented an RV to go on a trip and it parked it in the driveway for the 3 days leading up to the trip to pack it and for me to learn how half the things in it worked. Well, this is when we learned that HOAs are absolutely crazy and our neighbor was on the board of our local HOA. Within an hour of it being parked, he got home and stormed over demanding we remove it from his neighborhood or he would have it towed and fine us for every hour it was there. Myself, being the average and normal person, told him to kindly fuck off and get out of my driveway and told him if he returns I'll call the cops because he was screaming like a madman inches from my face. About 3 hours later, a big rig tow truck shows up and he walked up like he was a god and handed me a plain envelope with a letter inside that pretty much said, by order of the HOA, this RV is to be towed and a fine of $1,500 for violating their rules. While Mr. Crazy board member might not listen to reason, the tow truck guy they found wasn't so fond of entering my driveway and towing a vehicle when I told him if he comes on the property I'll call the cops. Once the tow truck driver decided he's done being involved in this mess and left, neighbor goes even more crazy and storms off. I call my friend to get his dad's number because he's an attorney to ask him about this insane letter and fine I just received and to ask him some legal advice. After speaking to his father, he told me to come down, write him a $500 check, and bring along all the papers I received when purchasing the home and the current letter I just received. The next day, he had a very friendly letter sent to my neighbor and the HOA board, basically telling my neighbor to fuck himself in legal terms and to leave us and our property alone. I then continued to receive fines of $1,500 a day in plain envelopes, not postmarked, stuffed into my mailbox, that I then turned over to my friend's father, and each time he sent another set of letters and contacted USPS to report the incidents. Turns out putting mail into people's mailbox is a crime. Who knew? Well, we decided to go on our week-long trip across the state and mildly forget about it all. Kind of upset I had to spend $500 to have an attorney send letters, but that's what they do. Fast forward to us returning from the trip and the RV back in our driveway for 2 days so we can unload, clean, then return it. Again, each day more envelopes stuffed into our mailbox and more visits to our attorney and more letters sent and more incidents reported to USPS. Well, here's where the fun really begins. Turns out Mr. Crazy finally gives me a summons to appear before the board. My attorney said this is crazy illegal because what they have done is use what looks like an actual legal document improperly to summon me to the board. Another $500 to the attorney and we wait for the date they made. a Tuesday at 10 a.m. They attempt to keep my attorney out of the room on some board policy rule, but quickly shut the hell up when he begins going over their own rules that they are violating to them. Deep in this HOA book are some very nicely worded rules and stuff outlining about what makes a board members ineligible and how they cannot serve if they commit certain infractions. Well, guess what Mr. Crazy Neighbor has done? Committed several of them, all documented. Also, the cherry on top is that if 51% of the HOA members vote to dissolve the HOA, it all goes away. Well, it happens my wife worked part-time from home during this mess and had all the free time in the world to begin a disband the HOA campaign. Over the course of the next 2 months, she went around and really began to get to know our neighborhood really well. Turns out a lot of people dislike the HOA and the power-hungry seniors who act like dictators that run it. The HOA attempted to stall everything by holding no meetings, another HOA violation, and began their own campaign, trying to change HOA rules to keep from being ousted, and a fairly racist flyer and letter to everyone complaining the dangers of not having an HOA and all the bad people, blacks and Mexicans, that will move in and take over, sell drugs, etc., that our houses would become much less valuable and everything else they could try. Turns out it's extremely fun to use someone's own rules against them. The neighborhood even started a fund that paid us back what it cost to get the attorney started and continued costs he had. A few weeks after their failed fear campaign and being forced to hold a meeting, a vote was called using their own rules. The HOA was no more and all remaining funds were to be dispersed back to the homeowners and members equally. This never happened. Turns out somehow the HOA used all their funds in the course of the last 2 months. About half of the former board members sold their homes and moved, including Mr. Crazy Neighbor. I spent 3 hours trying to find old news articles because it was reported on mostly due to the racist letters by the HOA, but it was too long ago to find anything. Moral of the whole mess, don't buy a home in HOA, and if you do, plan to hire an attorney. My ex-husband and a crappy marriage counselor tried to screw me over. Posted by user Holly Binks. This happened over 10 years ago. My first husband and I had been married for 24 years when he out of the blue said he wanted a divorce. As you can imagine, I was floored, scared, and devastated. I think his lawyer told him things would go better if he agreed to counseling. He chose a counselor that had been recommended by a friend. I work in the healthcare industry, so I'm pretty conscious about professionalism. This counselor kept us waiting 20 minutes for our appointment. Once introductions were made, she immediately asked for her check or cash before our session. By now, my spidey sense is off the charts. Finally, our session begins, but not until she pulls out her lunch and starts eating, saying she has just been too busy to eat. We then get down to the session, which is entirely focused on my childhood and my bipolar mother. This scenario repeats weekly for 6 weeks. We never discuss marriage issues or anything to do with my husband. In fact, she is totally zeroed in on me. Finally, I ask when we can talk about our marriage. She looks at my husband and says, "Fred, what do you want from all of this?" He says, "A divorce." I proceed to stand up and walk out, leaving them sitting there. I immediately go home and look her up on the state licensing website. The site shows that her license has lapsed. I immediately call the psychiatrist overseeing her work and let him know he is employing and billing for an unlicensed marriage counselor. He immediately apologizes and refunds the entire $900 spent with her to me. I then called the licensing board and told them she was practicing without a license. Revenge is best served frozen. Posted by a deleted user. We don't own a car and live at the end of a cul-de-sac. I have people use my driveway all the time to turn around. It's not a huge deal to me. A little annoying when they compact the snow and it's harder to shovel, but whatever. One of my neighbors had a ride service come pick up their child every day. The van would park in my spot and begin honking at like 8 a.m. I worked nights at the time. Half the time he'd be parked on my grass. I told the neighbor that I don't overly mind my spot being used, but not if he's going to honk like that every morning, and especially not if he's going to drive over what little lawn I have every time. I spoke with him and got, "What's your problem, man? It's not like you're using it." To which I repeated that I don't mind him using it if he stays off my grass and doesn't honk every morning. Apparently suggesting he wait till the kid notices he's there, or God forbid he have to drag his ass out of the car to knock on a door, was just ridiculous and inhumane of me. So I left a recycle bin at the foot of my driveway. He just ran over it. I called the dispatch for the ride service and was told they are subcontractors and technically self-employed, but they will pass along the message. I wake up the next day to pounding on my door. The dude is pissed. Him. How dare you call my boss, you stupid piece of shit? What the fuck is wrong with you? Me. Well, it's quite simple. You were told not to use my driveway if you were going to drive on my lawn and wake me up every morning. Now get off my doorstep. Him. I'll sue you if I lose my job because of you. Me. You've been warned. Don't trespass on my driveway or property again. Dude storms off in a huff, spouting obscenities, etc. So this happened on a Thursday. The kids have a PD day the next day, and it's supposed to be one of those delightful Canadian weekends where it drops to like minus 40 Celsius. For my American friends, minus 40 is where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet up, so it's freaking cold, lol. So that night, I grabbed one of my more beat up plastic garbage bins, made sure to plug all the holes with a generous amount of duct tape, stuck a sign on it that read private property, driveway not for public use, and proceeded to fill it to the brim with water. Now before anyone thinks I'm a jerk, willingly to potentially endanger the other kids in the car, I'd like to point out that my neighbor's kid is the first to be picked up, so it's just him in the car. Cue Monday morning. He sees the garbage can, backs up a bit more, and defiantly charges the garbage can as if to teach me a lesson and proceeds to cause some pretty serious damage to the front end of his car. Dude gets out fuming, calls the cops, and comes pounding on my door screaming about how I'm going to buy him a new car and that I'm about to be arrested. Cop. So let me make sure I understand this situation. He asked you not to park here if you couldn't refrain from honking, then warned you not to park here and put up a barrier. Now you expect him to be charged and pay for damages you caused yourself to your vehicle in an attempt to destroy his own personal property. I will never forget the look on his face when the officer said, "Yeah, that's not how this works," and turned to me and asking if I wanted to pursue charges for him damaging my personal property. I just gave him the most shit-eating grin I could muster and said, "Nah, I think we're good." I then went back inside to enjoy a morning coffee while watching him from my kitchen window as he paced back and forth in the cold, waiting for a tow truck and having to call the company he worked for to explain why they needed to send out another driver to complete his route. Alright everybody, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you aren't subscribed already, I hope that you'll decide to stay and subscribe. I upload every single day, and I will see you tomorrow. Oh, and let me know what you thought about this kind of like longer video with stories. If you like it, let me know. If you didn't like it, also let me know. Okay, bye!